The moment Ira Wallace fired Dale Purvis in front of the entire bunkhouse, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Purvis stood there in the golden morning light, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with the kind of fury that lives just beneath a man's skin when he has been humiliated in front of people he once commanded. His fists curled at his sides. The hands, 6 of them, lined up along the fence rail, coffee mugs steaming in the cool October air of 1882, went still as stone. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The horses in the corral shifted nervously, sensing something electric and dangerous in the air between the two men. "You are making a colossal mistake," Purvis said, his voice low and sharp as a blade being drawn slow from its sheath. "I have run this ranch for 8 years, Ira. 8 years. You cannot just throw that away because some woman rode up the lane with a sad story and a pair of worn-out boots." Ira Wallace did not blink. He was a tall man, lean in the way that long years of hard labor carve a man down to pure function, with weathered skin the color of saddle leather and silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He had seen 42 years of Texas sun, 42 years of drought and flood and cattle death, and not one of those years had softened the quiet certainty in his dark eyes. "You stole from me, Dale," Ira said. It was not an accusation delivered in anger. It was a verdict, calm and final, like a judge reading a sentence. 2 seasons running. I have the ledgers and I have Hendricks at the feed store willing to testify to what you charged me for versus what you actually bought. You think I didn't know? I knew. I was waiting to be sure. Purvis's face went from red to pale so fast it was like watching a man drown. "And the woman," Ira continued, not raising his voice even a fraction, "has nothing to do with why you are standing on the wrong side of your own authority this morning. You are fired because you are a thief. She is being hired because she needs work and I need a bookkeeper who isn't stealing from me. Those are 2 entirely separate facts. But they were not entirely separate. Not really. Not in the way that mattered most, which was the hidden truth coiled at the center of Ira Wallace's chest, since the moment Etta Carver had walked up his front porch steps 2 days ago. Etta Carver had arrived in Holt County, Texas, in the back of a freight wagon driven by old Silas McGee, who hauled dry goods out to the ranches twice a month. She had no luggage to speak of, only a canvas satchel that held a change of clothes, a leather-bound ledger that had belonged to her father, and a brass compass that no longer worked but which she carried out of sentiment rather than necessity. She was 26 years old, with dark chestnut hair pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat and sharp green eyes that did not look away when they ought to have. Silas had dropped her at the base of the lane leading to the Wallace Ranch, which everyone in the county called the Iron Cross on account of the brand Ira's father had registered 40 years before. The lane ran a quarter-mile through mesquite and cedar before opening into the yard, and Etta had walked it with her satchel over her shoulder and her chin level, even though her boots were thin enough that she could feel every pebble through the soles. She had come to Holt County for a reason that was part desperate necessity and part dogged determination, and both of those things lived equally in her heart. She had been born in San Antonio, the daughter of a man who kept books for 2 of the larger merchant houses in the city. He had taught her sums and ledgers and the elegant logic of numbers long before most girls her age were being taught anything more demanding than needlework. She had been good at it, genuinely, naturally good at it, the way some people are good at music or at reading the weather. Her father, Joseph Carver, had died of pneumonia the previous winter, leaving her in a boarding house with 3 months of paid rent, and a reputation as a capable bookkeeper that she had built working beside him for 7 years. But San Antonio's merchant houses did not hire women to keep their books, regardless of how capable those women were, and Etta had spent 8 months discovering that hard truth in ways that were humiliating and exhausting, and by the end, quietly infuriating. She had heard about a position through a woman at her church, a woman whose cousin's husband worked at a ranch in Holt County, and the position was nothing more than a rumor, really, that a big cattleman out there needed someone to manage his accounts, because the man he currently had in that role was either incompetent or dishonest. Etta had taken what was left of her money, bought a stage ticket to Holt County's small town of Raydrock, and then waited 2 days at the hotel until Silas McGee agreed to drop her at the Iron Cross on his route. She had not written ahead. She had not sent a letter or made an inquiry. She had simply come, because in her experience, if you wrote ahead and identified yourself as a woman, the answer was always no before you even walked through the door. She arrived at the Iron Cross on a Thursday afternoon and found Ira Wallace repairing fence on the east pasture, sleeves rolled to the elbows, working a wire stretcher with the concentrated focus of a man who did not enjoy being interrupted. She had walked out across the grass to him rather than waiting at the house, because waiting felt passive and passivity had gotten her nowhere. "Mr. Wallace," she had said, stopping at a respectful distance and making sure he could see her hands, because she had learned to announce herself carefully around men who worked alone on open land and who sometimes startled. He had looked up. He had looked at her for a long moment with those dark, assessing eyes, and then he had said, "Miss," and waited. "My name is Etta Carver. I have come from San Antonio about the bookkeeping position." Something had moved across his face then, quick as a cloud shadow. Nobody advertised a bookkeeping position. "No," she agreed, "but it exists whether advertised or not. Your accounts are being managed either poorly or dishonestly, Mr. Wallace. Either way, you are losing money you do not have to lose." He had looked at her for another long moment, his hands still on the wire stretcher, and then he had said, "Come up to the house." That had been Thursday. By Friday morning, he had sat down with her at the kitchen table and put 2 years of ledgers in front of her, and she had gone through them with the patient, methodical precision of someone who loved numbers the way other people loved stories. What she found made her jaw tighten and her pencil move faster. Charges duplicated. Feed quantities recorded as purchased that did not match the actual condition of the stock. Small amounts skimmed from here and there in ways that were designed to be invisible, and would have been invisible to anyone less familiar with the architecture of a well-kept ledger. By Friday evening, she had a full accounting of it laid out in clear columns on fresh paper, with the discrepancies marked in red. Ira had sat across the table from her and looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he had looked at her. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" he had asked. "Since I was 15, she said. "My father was an accountant. He taught me everything he knew, and I learned the rest on my own." "You are thorough." "I am precise," she corrected gently. "Thoroughness is a virtue, precision is a necessity." Something had shifted in his expression then. Something small and private there and gone like a fish rising to the surface of dark water. He had thanked her and told her he would need to think overnight. He had not slept. He had sat on his porch in the cold October dark and thought about what she had shown him, and thought about what he needed, and thought about things that had nothing to do with ledgers and everything to do with the way she had pushed her hair back from her face while she worked, unconsciously, as if she was completely absorbed in the numbers and had forgotten that anyone was watching. He was not the kind of man who made decisions based on feelings he did not fully understand. He was careful. He was measured. He had built this ranch from a modest inheritance into something his father would not have recognized, through pure, grinding discipline. But he had watched Etta Carver work for 4 hours and understood something fundamental about her. She was honest, she was capable, and she was here despite every reason the world had given her not to be. Those 3 things together were rarer than rain in August. He had gotten up at dawn, gone to the bunkhouse, and fired Dale Purvis in front of everyone, not out of impulse, out of certainty. Now, with Purvis riding off down the lane in cold, furious silence, and the hands slowly dispersing back to their morning work, with the careful avoidance of people who have witnessed something significant and do not want to be caught staring, Ira turned and walked back to the main house. Etta was in the kitchen, standing at the stove with her back to the door, warming her hands around a tin mug of coffee. She had heard the commotion in the yard but had not gone to the window. She was a woman who had learned, over years of navigating spaces that were not built for her, when to look and when to keep still. She heard his boots on the porch steps and turned. "It is done," he said. "The position is yours if you still want it." She studied him for a moment with those direct green eyes. "You fired him," she said. "Yes, because of what I found, partly, and because it was past time regardless." She nodded slowly. She set her coffee mug on the table. "I want to be clear about something, Mr. Wallace, before I agree. I do not want it to be understood by you or by anyone on this ranch that you did me a favor. I am offering you a service, a professional service for which I expect to be paid a fair wage. This is a business arrangement." He looked at her steadily. "I have never suggested otherwise." "No," she said, "but men often do not suggest it. They simply act as though it is true, and then the woman finds herself in an impossible position." "What wage are you asking?" She named a number. It was the same wage she had seen advertised for a bookkeeper position at a merchant house in San Antonio that had refused to interview her because of her sex. He agreed without negotiating. She had not expected that. She had expected him to counter lower, the way they always did, so that she could counter back and they could arrive at a compromise that still left her underpaid. His immediate agreement threw her slightly off balance in a way she did not show. "All right," she said. "Then we have an agreement." He gave a short nod. "I will have one of the hands move the extra cot from the bunkhouse into the storeroom. It is not elegant, but it is private. Private is more than sufficient." She spent the next 3 days in a kind of focused, industrious solitude, going through every document, every receipt, every record she could find, and building from the wreckage of Purvis's managed account something clean and accurate and useful. She worked at the kitchen table because it was the largest flat surface in the house, and Ira ate his meals at the far end of that table, and they talked across the papers and ledgers with the careful formality of two people who were aware of each other without acknowledging it. He was not a talkative man. He answered questions directly and asked them the same way, and when he had nothing specific to say he said nothing, which Etta found unusual and strangely comfortable. She had grown up around men who filled silence with the sound of their own voices whether or not they had anything to contribute, and Ira's quietness felt, after the first day, like a kind of respect. He noticed things. She caught him noticing them. The way he would glance up from his own work and take in something about the room, about the papers spread on the table, about her posture when she was frustrated with a number that would not resolve. He never commented. He simply looked, and then looked away, as if cataloging something he was uncertain what to do with. On the 4th evening, it rained. It came in fast from the northwest the way Texas storms do, with 20 minutes of bruised purple sky as warning, and then the full weight of it hitting the metal roof of the main house like 10,000 small drums all at once. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour. Etta, who had gone to her storeroom without the lantern because she had forgotten it, found herself sitting in the dark listening to the rain and aware of a loneliness that was physical in its weight. She had been alone since her father died. Not friendless exactly, but alone in the particular way that people are alone when the person who understood them best is gone, and the world has not offered anyone else who comes close. She had channeled the loneliness into work, because that was what she knew how to do. But in the dark with the rain hammering the roof, the loneliness was harder to outmaneuver. She picked up the brass compass that no longer worked and turned it in her hands in the darkness. North, it said. Always north, frozen in its conviction, reliable in its lie. There was a knock at the storeroom door. "Miss Carver," Ira's voice through the wood. "I noticed your lantern is not lit. I brought one." She opened the door. He stood in the narrow hallway with a lit lantern in one hand, and she noticed a second mug of coffee in the other. He held out the lantern first. Then, after a brief hesitation, the coffee. "I made extra," he said, which was so clearly a construction of plausible deniability that she had to resist the urge to smile. "Thank you," she said, taking both. He lingered for a fraction of a second longer than was necessary to hand over a lantern and a mug, and she was aware of the warm light between them, making the narrow hallway feel smaller and warmer, and more significant than a hallway had any right to feel. "The storeroom is cold," he said. "You are welcome to sit by the main room fire." "I don't want to intrude." "It is not intruding. It is sitting by a fire." There was something almost dry in his tone, something that was not quite humor but lived in the same neighborhood. She came and sat by the fire. He sat across from her, and they read in silence. He had a farming almanac. She had her father's old ledger that she sometimes went through not to find information, but simply because it was written in her father's hand. And the rain came down outside, and the fire cracked and popped, and the room was warm and quiet, and full of a feeling that Etta recognized and did not entirely trust. It felt like home. And she did not have a home anymore, and therefore the feeling was either a gift or a trap, and she did not yet know which. Over the following weeks, the rhythms of the Iron Cross began to reshape themselves around Etta's presence in ways both practical and subtle. The books she maintained were, within a month, the clearest and most accurate records the ranch had carried in a decade. She reorganized the supply ordering system, identified 2 vendors who had been overcharging for years, and set up a simple ledger for the hands' wages that made paydays run without the usual confusion and argument about what was owed. The hands, there were 8 of them in total, were cautious around her at first, in the way men are cautious around something they have no prior category for. A woman who worked with books and numbers on a cattle ranch in 1882 in Holt County, Texas, existed outside their prior experience. They were polite, with the careful, slightly stilted politeness of men who are trying not to say the wrong thing and do not entirely know what the wrong thing is. The one who thawed first was a young hand named Tommy Birch, who was 19 and from Mississippi, and had a gift for talking to almost anyone after approximately 3 minutes of shared silence. He brought her a cup of coffee one morning without being asked, set it beside her on the table, and said, "My mama kept books for the church back home. She said numbers were the most honest things in the world because they never changed their minds about what they were." Etta had looked up from the ledger. "Your mama was wise. She was sharp as a tack and twice as pointed," Tommy said, grinning. "She would have liked you." After Tommy, the others came around slowly. Not all of them, not entirely. There was a man named Greer who had a deep-seated suspicion of anything he had not encountered before, and who avoided her with a persistence that might have been rude in any other context, but in the context of the time and place was almost a form of respect. He had decided he did not know how to be around her, and had resolved the problem by simply not trying, which was at least an honest response. Ira watched all of this with the careful attention of a man who was keeping track of more than one thing at once. He watched her navigate the hands with patience and humor, and a complete absence of the anxiety he might have expected. He watched her work through problems methodically and without complaint. He watched her take her meals at the kitchen table and eat with the unpretentious appetite of someone who had worked hard enough to be genuinely hungry, not the careful, performative delicacy that women in town sometimes deployed at tables where men were watching. He was watching her, and he knew he was watching her, and he was deeply uncomfortable about the fact that he was watching her, because he had been a man who lived his life in clear categories, and this woman was not fitting into any of them. She was an employee. That category was clear. The complication was that she did not feel like an employee in the same way that Purvis had felt like an employee, or Tommy Birch, or any of the others. She felt like a person who was fully present in a space, which was, he was slowly understanding, something he had not had at the Iron Cross in a very long time. His wife, Margaret, had died 6 years ago. Influenza, the winter of 1876, the same epidemic that had taken so many others in the county that the churchyard was still catching up on headstones. They had been married for 9 years and had no children, not for want of trying, and the loss of Margaret had left him with a grief that he had processed in the way he processed most difficult things, by working harder and talking less and going very, very far down inside himself until the surface was calm and manageable. He had not let anyone pass the surface since. Not deliberately, not as a decision he made with his full attention, simply as a consequence of the way he had been living. Now Etta Carver was sitting at his kitchen table every evening, and the surface was behaving strangely. He told himself he was grateful to have competent help. He told himself that any warmth he felt in her presence was simple human comfort after years of functional loneliness. Nothing more specific than that. Certainly nothing that required examination. He told himself these things with considerable force and was not entirely successful in believing them. The moment it became impossible to keep believing them was the night of the Hendricks barn dance. The Hendricks family, Jonas Hendricks, who ran the feed store in Riedrock, and his wife Clara and their 4 children, held a barn dance every year in late October to mark the end of the working season before winter set in. It was an Iron Cross tradition to attend. Ira went every year, danced with the married women when it was polite to do so, drank 2 glasses of whiskey exactly, and came home alone. It was a ritual of community participation that he performed with the same deliberate discipline that he applied to everything else. He told Etta about the barn dance on a Tuesday. He was not entirely sure why he told her. He told himself it was courtesy, so she would know where he was going on the Saturday, so the absence of his presence at the supper table would not be unexplained. She had looked up from the ledger. Is it open to anyone in the county? Generally. She considered this for a moment with an expression he could not quite decode. I have not been to a dance in years, she said, almost to herself. Then she looked back at the ledger as if she had not said anything, and he stood there for a moment longer than he should have before returning to his own work. On Saturday evening, she emerged from the storeroom in a dress he had not seen before, dark green, the same shade as her eyes, with a high collar and fitted sleeves, and the kind of small, meticulous care about its condition that spoke of something kept for important occasions. She had done her hair differently, down around her face first and then up, with small escaped pieces at her temples. She looked in the warm lamplight of the hallway like a completely different problem than the one he had been carefully, determinedly not thinking about. He was in his good coat and his clean hat. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "The wagon is ready." She had nodded and reached for her own coat, and he had taken it from the hook on the wall and held it for her, which he had done purely on reflex, and which she had accepted with a brief, startled glance before she threaded her arms into the sleeves. The Hendricks barn was lit with dozens of lanterns and smelled of hay and cedar, and the particular warm sweetness of a large crowd of people in a small space in the cold. The fiddle player, a wiry old man named Cantrell, had already started up when they arrived, and the floor was crowded with couples in various states of dancing enthusiasm. Clara Hendricks came at Etta immediately, the way Clara came at everyone, with the warm, inclusive energy of a woman who made strangers into neighbors in approximately 7 minutes. She had Etta's name, her story in outline, and a whiskey punch in her hand before Ira had finished tying the horses. He found them together near the cider barrel, Clara with her arm linked through Etta's as if they had been friends for 20 years, and something loosened in him at the sight. He wanted her to have this. He had not known he wanted it until right now, but he did. He asked her to dance during the 3rd reel. He asked in the way he asked most things, directly and without preamble, extending his hand and saying, "Would you like to?" And she had looked at his hand for just a beat too long before she took it, and then they were on the floor and the fiddle was up and the crowd was moving around them. She danced well. Better than well, she had the easy, unhurried rhythm of someone who had danced for pleasure rather than performance, and she moved with him without the cautious stiffness that comes from dancing with a near stranger. Her hand was warm in his. The floor was crowded and the music was fast, and twice they were pressed closer together than the dance technically required by the press of other couples. And he was aware of her hand on his arm, and the green of her dress and the bright, quick intelligence in her eyes when she laughed at something Tommy Birch did at the edge of the floor that was either dancing or a parody of dancing. And he thought, with a clarity that was almost alarming, that he was in serious trouble. Not bad trouble. Something else entirely. Something he had forgotten the shape of. He did not say anything about it. He walked her back to the ranch in the wagon under a sky full of stars so dense they looked like spilled salt, and they talked about the Hendricks family and the music, and a remark that Jonas Hendricks had made about the coming winter, and it was easy and natural and comfortable in a way that felt like something being built, stone by stone, without either of them explicitly deciding to build it. At the porch steps, she stopped and turned and looked at him with those steady eyes. "Thank you for taking me tonight," she said. "You are welcome," he said. There was a pause that was full of things neither of them said. Then she went inside, and he stood on the porch in the cold dark for a long time before he followed. November came in with frost and the first norther of the season, a wall of cold air that dropped the temperature 40 degrees in 6 hours and drove everyone inside and the cattle to the southern pastures. The Iron Cross settled into its winter rhythms, shorter days, longer evenings, the bunkhouse lit late with the sound of the hands playing cards, and the main house quiet in the way it was quiet around Ira's particular brand of self-contained silence. But the quiet had changed texture since Etta arrived. It was still quiet, but it was the quiet of two people in the same space rather than one person in an empty one, and Ira was still adjusting to what that meant when the trouble started. Dale Purvis had not gone quietly. Ira had known he wouldn't. A man who spent 8 years skimming from a rancher did not take the exposure of his scheme with dignity and acceptance. He had gone to Reed Rock and started talking, which was exactly what men like Purvis did when they were cornered. They made the story about something other than what they had done. The story Purvis told in Reed Rock was that Ira Wallace had fired a loyal man of 8 years to put a woman in the house, and a woman of uncertain character at that. He did not say explicitly what he meant by uncertain character. He did not have to. The implication was clear to everyone who heard it, designed with the precision of a man who understood how innuendo worked and how little direct accusation was necessary to make it land. Etta heard about it from Clara Hendricks, who drove out to the Iron Cross on a cold Tuesday morning with a fresh-baked pie and a look on her face that was protective and apologetic in equal measure. She sat across from Etta at the kitchen table while Etta was working and told her what was being said. Etta listened without changing her expression. When Clara finished, she set her pencil down very carefully on the table, precisely parallel to the edge of the ledger, and was quiet for a moment. "How widely is this being said?" she asked. "Enough," Clara said. "People know what Purvis is, and most people in this county know Ira, and they are not going to believe the worst of it. But enough people will talk that it will be uncomfortable for you." "Has it reached Ira?" Clara hesitated. "It has reached Ira," Etta said. "Someone told him yesterday in town. Jonas told me he looked like a man who had just bitten into something he could not spit out. He did not say much." Etta nodded slowly. She picked up her pencil. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I mean that sincerely." Clara reached across the table and put her hand over Etta's. "You have done nothing wrong," she said, with the quiet emphasis of a woman who meant it to land. "No," Etta agreed. "I haven't." When Ira came in at noon, she was still at the table, but the ledger was closed, and she was sitting with her hands folded on top of it, waiting. He saw this immediately. He was the kind of man who read a room in the first second, and he set his hat on the hook and did not go for the coffee first, which he always did. "Clara came," Etta said. "I know what Clara came about," he said. "I want to address it directly." "There is nothing to address." His voice was flat. "Purvis is a thief who got caught. He is attempting to save his own reputation by destroying yours. What he is saying is false, and anyone who knows either of us knows it is false. And the people who do not know us," she kept her voice even, There are enough of them. And the implication that my position here is something other than professional, that implication causes you harm. I am aware of that. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his eyes she had not seen there before, not quite anger, not quite the carefully managed steadiness she had come to know. Something beneath those things, something that was struggling to stay below the surface. "You are not leaving because of Dale Purvis," he said. It came out more forcefully than he had apparently intended because he paused after it as if hearing it from the outside. She looked at him. "Is that a request or a statement?" "It is a fact," he said. "The only way you leave this ranch is if you choose to. I will not have your decision made for you by the bitterness of a man who stole from me and is now trying to steal from you." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, a cold wind was moving the bare mesquite branches in slow, dark strokes against the pale sky. "All right," she said. "I am not leaving." "Good," he said. Then he went and poured his coffee, and she opened the ledger, and neither of them spoke of it again directly. But something had shifted between them in that exchange, something that could not be unshifted. He had not let her go. He had told her, in the only way he appeared capable of telling her anything of that nature, that her presence here mattered to him. She turned that knowledge over in her mind for the rest of the afternoon, careful and precise with it, like a number that needed to be correctly placed before it could be used. 2 weeks later, Purvis made a more direct attempt. He showed up at the Iron Cross gate on a Saturday morning with 2 men. Ira did not recognize one of them, a small, prosperous-looking man in a city coat that marked him as someone from outside Holt County, and the other a large man with a flat expression, who stood behind the first one in the way of someone being paid to stand places. Ira met them at the gate. He did not invite them through it. Purvis's voice had the overly measured quality of a man who had rehearsed. "This gentleman," he said, indicating the city coat, "is a business associate of mine with an interest in this property. He has asked me to deliver a message." "What message?" Ira said. "That the Iron Cross is worth considerably more than it was 2 years ago, on account of the new railroad survey that came through last spring. The survey that your county commissioner has not made generally known yet, but which some people are aware of." The city coat man smiled, a thin, careful smile. "Mr. Purvis informs us that the ranch's books may be somewhat in disarray, and that a motivated seller might be willing to—" "No," Ira said. The city coat man blinked. "You have not heard I have heard enough," Ira said. "I know what a railroad land speculator looks like, and I know what Dale Purvis looks like when he is trying to use someone else's money to punish me for catching him stealing mine. You will go back the way you came. The Iron Cross is not for sale, not at any price." The speculator's smile thinned further. "The railroad will come through regardless, Mr. Wallace. Having cooperative neighbors makes the process smoother." "And having a rifle pointed at you makes the process over," Ira said, without raising his voice and without his expression changing at all. The 3 men left. Ira stood at the gate for a long moment after they had gone, looking out at the road they had taken, and felt the specific anger of a man whose home has been threatened in a way he was not equipped to respond to with his hands. He could fence a line, break a horse, read a drought in the behavior of cattle that had not yet stopped drinking. He could not navigate a railroad land speculation scheme. Etta could. He found her at the kitchen table. He told her what had been said. She listened with the focused, still quality she had when she was processing something, and when he finished she asked 3 questions in quick succession. Who was the county commissioner? When had the railroad survey been conducted? And whether Ira owned the mineral rights to the Iron Cross or whether they had been separated from the land title at any point. He answered all 3. She picked up a pencil. She spent the next 2 hours going through the land title documents he brought her from the strongbox under his bed, a box he had not opened in years, trusting the contents because he did not have reason to doubt them, and what she found tightened her jaw and made her write faster. The mineral rights were intact, the title was clean, but there was a property tax discrepancy that had been quietly accumulating for 4 years, rooted in an assessment error that Purvis had never corrected and had possibly allowed to stand deliberately. If left unaddressed, the discrepancy would eventually provide grounds for a legal challenge to the ownership of a portion of the eastern pasture, the exact pasture the railroad survey had run through. This was not accidental, she said. Ira sat very still across the table from her. Purvis has been in communication with these people for at least 4 years, she said. What he stole in the supply ledgers was petty. This is the actual plan. He was creating the conditions for a legal ownership challenge to the most valuable portion of your land, intending to be positioned on the other side of that challenge when it came. Silence. The kind of silence that is not empty but full. Can you fix it? He asked. Yes. I need to file a corrected assessment with the county tax office and pay the back amount, which is not inconsequential but is manageable with the current reserves. I also need to get an attorney in Redrock to formally document the mineral rights and register the corrected title. It should all be done within the month, and once it is done, the eastern pasture is unassailable. He looked at her across the table, across the papers and the pencil marks and the clean, precise columns of her work, and something in his face that had been carefully maintained for a very long time was not maintaining itself very well. Etta, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed it the way you notice a door that was previously closed now standing open suddenly, with a feeling that is partly surprise and partly the awareness that you had been waiting for it without knowing you were waiting. Yes, she said. I do not know how to. He stopped. He was not a man who started sentences without knowing how to finish them, and the stopping was itself a communication of something he was not saying. You do not have to, she said quietly. I think I do, he said. I think I have been not saying something for approximately 6 weeks, and I would prefer to say it than to keep not saying it, because I am not built for the kind of silence that is made of things avoided. She set her pencil down. She was watching him with an expression that was careful and warm and entirely open. I am not a man who does things without understanding why he is doing them, he said. I need you to know that. When I hired you because you were the best person for this work. That has not changed. The work you do here is worth every cent I pay you and more, and your position on this ranch is yours because you earned it. But, she said, but I am also a man who has been alone for 6 years and who had stopped expecting that to change, and who is now finding that expectation very difficult to maintain. He held her gaze with the steady, undefended honesty of someone who is saying something true and knows it is true and is frightened of it and is saying it anyway. I am not asking you for anything, Etta. I am just telling you because I think you deserve to know that you are the first person I have sat across a table from in 6 years who I actually wanted to keep sitting across a table from. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire in the stove ticked softly. Ira, she said. His name in her mouth was its own kind of declaration. I came to this ranch to earn a living. I have been very careful about that, very clear about the professional nature of my position here with you and with everyone. I know, he said. I was careful because I have been in situations where men treated a woman's need for employment as though it made her beholden to them. I have been in situations where a professional relationship was used to create an obligation I did not agree to. I needed this position to be clean of that, and you gave me that. You have given me that every single day. I know, he said again, and his voice was very even and very careful. Which is precisely why, she said, and her voice softened into something she was allowing rather than performing. I believe you when you say what you just said, and why it is not a simple thing to hear. She paused. Because I have not been sitting across this table for 6 weeks without noticing things. About you, about this place, about how it feels to be here. He did not move. He was watching her with an intensity that was focused entirely inward, as if he was trying to hear something he had not been sure he would be allowed to hear. I am not asking you for anything either, she said. I am just telling you that the table goes both ways. Something happened to his face. Something quiet and profound and long overdue, like a landscape finally receiving rain. They did not rush. This was not the kind of thing either of them was built to rush. But something had been named, and naming changes the shape of things. In the weeks that followed, the space between them contracted slowly and naturally, the way cold things warm when placed beside a fire, not dramatically, not all at once, but inevitably, and with a depth that made the eventual warmth feel permanent. He began small things. He brought her coffee without framing it as an afterthought. He asked her opinion on things that were not strictly in her professional domain. Which pasture to rotate the winter herd through, whether the bunkhouse should be rechinked before the worst of the cold. She gave her opinions directly, and without the hedging she had previously maintained to keep the professional line clear, because the line did not need to be guarded in the same way anymore. She asked him things too. She asked about the ranch's history, about his father, who had built the iron cross on land that was mostly cedar and rock and stubbornness. She asked about Margaret in a gentle, careful way one evening when they were both sitting by the fire, and the subject arose naturally from something else. And he answered in the measured, honest way he answered everything, without either shutting the subject down or letting it swallow the conversation. Margaret had been a good woman, he said. She had been practical and steady and kind. He had loved her in the way that people who build their lives together love each other, which is a real and genuine love. And she was gone, and the grief was still there, but it had changed shape over 6 years from something sharp to something that simply was, the way a healed break is still a break even when it no longer hurts. Etta had listened to all of this and then had said, "The love does not go away. It just makes room for what comes next." He had looked at her for a long moment. "That is a generous way to see it." "It is the accurate way," she said. "The heart is not a ledger with a finite number of columns." December arrived, and with it the tax filing and the attorney visit and the careful, methodical dismantling of Dale Purvis's 4-year scheme against the Iron Cross. The corrected assessment was filed. The mineral rights were registered in full. The eastern pasture was legally impregnable. When the city coat speculator sent a letter in early December suggesting that the ownership question remained open, Ira's attorney in Redrock sent a response so complete and documented that the matter ended there. Purvis, Ira heard from Jonas Hendricks, had left the county. Nobody seemed to know or care particularly where he had gone. Christmas on the Iron Cross was quiet. The hands went mostly to their own families or to Redrock for the holiday. Tommy Birch stayed, because Mississippi was too far and too complicated. Ira gave the hands a bonus from the wages fund that Etta had identified could bear the expenditure without straining the winter reserves. The bonus was larger than any of them had expected and created. In the bunkhouse, a warmth of feeling toward both Ira and Etta that had the specific quality of loyalty earned rather than assumed. On Christmas Eve, Ira came to the kitchen to find that Etta had done something with pine cones and cedar sprigs and a red ribbon she had found somewhere, and the kitchen table was decorated, and she had made a proper dinner: roast chicken and sweet potatoes and a dried apple pie, which she had managed with the same focused efficiency she applied to the ledgers. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at what she had done. "I know it is simple," she said, with just enough uncertainty in her voice to show she had not been entirely sure how it would land. "It is not simple," he said. "It is exactly right." They ate together at the decorated table, and Tommy Birch joined them, cheerful and easy and grateful in the uncomplicated way of a young man who has nowhere else to be but does not mind because where he is happens to be warm and full of good food. After Tommy went to the bunkhouse, Ira and Etta sat by the fire in the main room. She had brought her father's ledger, the one she kept for sentiment, and she had it open on her knee, but she was not reading it. He watched the fire. After a while he said, "Next year will be a good year for this ranch. The accounts are clean, the title is clean, the cattle are in better condition than they have been in 4 seasons. All of that is because of you." "And you," she said, You built all of this. I maintained it, he said. There is a difference. He looked at her. The firelight made everything soft and warm. I want to say something. Then say it, she said. I am not a man who is easy to live with, he said. I know that about myself. I am quiet when people want words, and I am direct when people want tact, and I have habits that are 20 years set in their ways, and I am not young enough to pretend otherwise. I did not ask you to be young, she said. I know, but I want you to know what you would be. He paused, and the pause was full of something that was both enormous and very specific. What you would be choosing if you chose it. She put her father's ledger aside. She looked at him directly with those steady green eyes, and her face was open and warm and fully present in the way it was when she was working on something she cared about. Ira Wallace, she said. I have kept books for this ranch for 3 months. I know exactly what the Iron Cross is worth and what it costs and what its risks and its strengths are. I am a woman who values precision, and I am telling you precisely. I have made my assessment and I am not uncertain about it. He was quiet for a moment. That might be the most unusual declaration I have ever received, he said, and there it was, the thing that lived near humor in him, closer to the surface than it usually came. She smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that changes the whole face. I am a practical woman. You are extraordinary, he said, simply and without ceremony, and because it was said without ceremony, it was entirely convincing. He asked her to marry him on a clear January morning, outside, by the east fence, where he had been repairing wire when she had first walked out to him across the grass. He brought her out there deliberately, which she understood and was moved by, and he asked her without preamble and without performance, with only the wide blue Texas sky above them and the cold winter grass and the iron and cedar smell of the land around them. She said yes. She said yes in the same direct, unhesitating way she said everything. And then they stood there in the cold morning air with the fence between them, and then not between them. And he took her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her with a tenderness that had been building for months and had nowhere left to go but forward. They were married in Redrock in February 1883, at the small Presbyterian church where Clara and Jonas Hendricks also attended, with Clara crying happily in the front pew and Tommy Birch standing up as witness, with the earnest, pleased face of a young man who is glad the adults in his life have sorted themselves out. The minister asked Etta if she would love and obey, and Etta said very clearly that she would love and she would honor, and Ira, beside her, said absolutely nothing about the word that had not been said, which was the perfect response. Marriage, for Ira Wallace, was something he had done before and understood in its bones. The rhythms of it, the daily reality of sharing a life with another person. But marriage to Etta was not a repetition of anything. It was its own entirely new experience, built on entirely different architecture. She was not a woman who submitted to silence when she had something to say. She was not a woman who softened the truth to make it easier to receive. She came at problems the way she came at ledgers, directly, methodically, without drama, but also without evasion. And he found, to his genuine surprise, that this was exactly what he had needed for a very long time without knowing he needed it. He had spent years in the quiet of his own judgment, and her presence was the intelligent conversation he had not realized he was missing. She, in turn, discovered that his quietness was not absence but depth. When he spoke, it was worth hearing. When he acted, it was because he had thought carefully and was certain. He was a man who could be trusted completely, not because he was performing trustworthiness, but because it was simply what he was, as fundamental to him as his height or the color of his eyes. She had not entirely trusted that kind of man existed. Years of navigating a world that treated her competence as suspicious and her independence as a problem had built certain defensive structures in her, and she had not been sure those structures would ever come down entirely. But he never gave her reason to maintain them, and slowly, through the winter and into the spring, they came down. Not all at once. Brick by brick, the way things that are built to last are dismantled slowly, and with the full weight of evidence behind each removal. Spring brought the calving season, and the Iron Cross was busy from before dawn to after dark with new life and hard work, and the particular exhaustion of a ranch at full operation. Etta, who had spent her life with books and numbers, discovered that she was not averse to the physical work of the ranch when it was needed. She helped with the records, of course, meticulously tracking every calf born against every cow in the herd, but she also helped in the practical ways that were simply necessary when the work was more than the hands could cover alone. She learned to hold a rope. She learned which sounds the cattle made when something was wrong. Ira watched her learn with an attention that was both proud and something more private, the delight of watching someone you love discover they are capable of more than they knew. He taught her things carefully and practically, without condescension, and without the exaggerated patience that is its own form of condescension. He explained what he knew and expected her to use what he told her, and she always did. By summer, the Iron Cross was running more efficiently than it had in years. The hands knew their wages would be right on payday. The accounts with the vendors were clear and fair. The herd was healthy. There was a quality to the place that had not been there before, a sense of things being well-ordered and well-tended. That was the result of two competent people working in the same direction. Tommy Birch, who had gone back to Mississippi in March to settle some family business, and had returned in May with a slightly dazed expression and a photograph in his shirt pocket, announced in June that he intended to bring a young woman named Rosa back with him come fall, and asked Ira if there would be a position for him if he had a family to house. Ira had looked at Etta. Etta had looked at the accounts. Yes, she had said, without hesitation. Tommy had looked like a man whose world had just been correctly assembled. In the summer of 1883, Etta discovered she was pregnant. She told Ira in the evening, sitting on the porch in the long summer dusk, with the first stars appearing and the mesquite perfuming the warm air. She told him directly, without preamble, in the way she told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. She watched his face. What happened to it was not something he controlled. It simply moved through him, visible on the surface in a way his face rarely permitted, and what it said was that he was a man who had believed a certain door was permanently closed and was now being shown it was open after all. "Are you well?" he asked, which was the first thing he said, and which told her something important about him that she had already known but was glad to have confirmed. "I am very well," she said. "I saw the doctor in Redrock on Thursday." "Thursday," he said. "You went on Thursday and you have not said anything for 4 days." "I needed to be certain first," she said. "I am precise, remember." He laughed. It was a real, unguarded laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. And it was, she thought, one of the most beautiful sounds she had ever heard, because it was so entirely genuine and so rarely deployed that, when it came, it had the quality of something irreplaceable. He reached across the porch bench and took her hand, and they sat in the summer dark and the stars came out, and neither of them said anything for a long time, which was its own kind of speech. Their son was born in March of 1884, delivered by a midwife named Adela Reyes, who came from Redrock, and who had delivered half the children in Holt County, and was competent in the absolute and unflappable way that comes from many years of experience with unpredictable situations. He was a healthy boy, 8 pounds and loud about it, with dark hair and a particular expression of outraged bewilderment at the existence of the world that Etta recognized immediately as his father's. They named him Joseph, for Etta's father. Ira held his son for the first time with the focused, deliberate care of a man who understood that he was holding something irreplaceable and was not going to waste a second of it. He sat in the chair beside Etta's bed with Joseph in his arms, and Etta watched him from the pillow, exhausted and warm and full of a love so large it did not seem like it could be contained in a single body. "He has your forehead," she said. "He has your expression," Ira said. "That look of seeing through whatever someone is trying to pretend. "That will be useful to him," she said. "Extremely," he agreed, and looked up at her with eyes that were doing the thing they did now sometimes, the thing she had been the cause of and which she never got tired of, the thing where all the careful management of his face simply stood aside. Joseph Wallace was a good baby, which was fortunate because the Iron Cross in the spring of 1884 was as busy as it had ever been. The ranch had grown in the second year of Etta's management, not dramatically, not through expansion, but through efficiency. The money that had been leaking through Purvis's decade of quiet theft had been recovered in the accounts. The deals with vendors had been renegotiated. Two smaller ranches nearby that had fallen on hard times had sold parcels of adjacent land that Etta had been able to purchase at fair prices, extending the Iron Cross's pasture capacity by a third. The railroad came through Holt County in 1884, not through the eastern pasture but 3 miles north of it, along the route the survey had eventually settled on. It brought the town of Redrock a new depot and a new wave of commerce and people, and changed the texture of the county in ways both welcome and complicated. Etta navigated the changes with his customary steadiness, and Etta kept the accounts with her customary precision, and together they made decisions about what to hold and what to let go of with the joint confidence of two people who trusted each other's judgment completely. There were difficulties, of course. There always are. A drought year in 1885 that required hard choices about the herd size. A fever that went through the cattle in the spring of 1886 and cost them 17 head before they got it contained. A dispute with a neighboring rancher about a waterway that took 3 months and a surveyor and a great deal of controlled patience to resolve. Through all of it, they were together. This was the thing Etta returned to in her private thoughts during the difficult times, that whatever was hard for both of them, that there was no version of the difficulty in which she faced it alone. She had been alone for the year after her father died, and she knew precisely what alone felt like, and this was its absolute opposite. Etta, for his part, had rebuilt himself after Margaret's death on the assumption that he would be, from that point forward, essentially solitary. He had been wrong. He was grateful, with a depth that was not expressible in direct speech, to have been wrong. He told Etta he was grateful in the ways he knew how to, in attentiveness, in the daily consistency of his care, in the moments when he stopped what he was doing to simply be with her on the porch in the evening, at the kitchen table in the lamplight, in the early morning when the ranch was quiet and the day had not yet begun. In the summer of 1886, Etta was pregnant again. She told him the same way in the evening, and he responded the same way, first concern for her health, then the quiet, profound happiness that his face was better at showing now than it had been 2 years ago. She had, she thought, done that. She had opened something in him that practice had made more open, and the thought gave her a satisfaction that had nothing to do with precision and everything to do with love. Tommy Birch and his wife Rosa, who had indeed come from Mississippi in October of 1883, and had married Tommy in a small ceremony at the Hendricks Ranch, and had settled into the Iron Cross with the cheerful, practical energy of a woman who had been raised on a farm and found nothing in ranch life particularly daunting, had a daughter born in 1885, whom they named Clara for Clara Hendricks, who had beamed with such pleasure at the honor that Jonas Hendricks had been moved to blow his nose loudly and pretend he had dust in his eyes. The Iron Cross was becoming something like a community in its small way, which pleased Etta and which Etta, she thought, had not anticipated but had turned out to want more than he had known. Their second child, a girl, was born in January of 1887. They named her Margaret because that name deserved to live on the Iron Cross, and because Etta said it quietly and carefully when they were talking about names, and Etta had said, equally quietly, yes, of course, that was exactly right. Margaret Wallace was born with her mother's green eyes and her father's deliberate, watchful manner, and was from her first weeks on the earth clearly a person who was paying careful attention to everything around her, which struck the entire ranch as entirely appropriate. The spring following Margaret's birth was the most contented Etta could remember. Joseph was 3.5, old enough to follow his father around the yard with the focused determination of a small person, with very important nothing to do. Ira gave him small tasks, carrying a single post, holding a piece of wire with the same serious respect he extended to full-grown workers, which Joseph received with enormous gravity. Etta watched this from the porch one afternoon, Margaret asleep against her shoulder, and thought about everything that had happened in the 4 years since she had climbed down from Silas McGee's freight wagon with a canvas satchel and a plan and more desperation than she had shown on the outside. She had come for a job. She had arrived at the moment Purvis's theft was discovered, in the way that timing sometimes works, not as accident, she thought, but as the convergence of a need and the person best suited to meet it finding each other through the unlikely machinery of rumor and desperation, and a woman who did not write ahead because she knew she would not get an answer worth having. She had come for a job, and she had found a life, a whole one. One that was hers in all its dimensions, the professional competence she had fought for, the partnership she had not dared to want, the children she had not known she was waiting for, the land that had become home in a way that San Antonio, even with her father, had never quite managed. She heard his boots on the porch steps and felt him stop beside her, looking at the yard where Joseph was very seriously carrying an empty bucket from one side of the yard to the other for no reason that was apparent to anyone but himself. "He has taken 7 trips with that bucket," Ira said. "He is being thorough," Etta said. Ira's hand settled at the small of her back, warm and steady. "There is some important task to accomplish with an empty bucket, apparently. He is learning the route," Etta said. "He will put something in it eventually." Ira looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because he is your son," she said. "He does not do things without a reason. He is just still working out what the reason is." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I want you to know something." "Tell me," she said. "When I hired you," he said, "I did not know what I was doing. I mean that honestly. I thought I was solving a practical problem. I thought I was replacing a dishonest foreman with a competent bookkeeper. That was the scope of what I understood myself to be doing." She looked up at him. "I had no idea," he said, "that I was doing anything else. And I want you to know that I think about that. I think about how easily it might not have happened. If Silas McGee had taken a different route, if you had written ahead and been turned away, if the moment had been different, it frightens me sometimes to think of how small the margin was." "But the margin was enough," she said. "Yes," he said, "it was enough." She turned slightly so she could look at him fully, and he was looking at her with the open, unguarded attention she had learned to read as his most complete expression of what he felt, not words, but presence, full and deliberate and entirely directed at her. "I love you," she said. She had said it before, many times now, but each time she said it, it was exact, precise. The word meant what it said. "I love you," he said. He had learned, she thought, that the words did not diminish in the saying. He had been afraid of that, somewhere in him, afraid that saying it made it smaller when in fact the opposite was true. Each time it was said, it was real. Joseph arrived at the porch steps with his empty bucket, looked up at both his parents with great seriousness and announced that the bucket needed water. "Does it?" Ira said with equal gravity. "Yes," Joseph confirmed. "From the pump." "Well," Ira said, "then we had better fill it." He descended the porch steps and took Joseph's small hand in his large one, and they walked together toward the pump, Joseph still carrying the bucket with both hands, Ira adjusting his stride to match the small, determined legs beside him, and Etta stood on the porch with her daughter against her shoulder, and the spring sun warm on the iron cross, and felt, with the full weight of a woman who had been precise about things all her life, that this was exactly what she had been trying to get to. Not a job. Not safety, not even comfort, though it was those things too. This specific life, this specific warmth, this specific man and these specific children, and this land that smelled of cedar and mesquite and cattle and work, and all the good, hard, beautiful things that made a life real instead of theoretical. The summer of 1887 passed richly. The Iron Cross's accounts were healthy. The herd was the largest it had been in the ranch's history, and Holt County was settling into the particular prosperity of a frontier county that has survived its hardest years and is beginning to build something more permanent than survival. Red Rock had 2 churches now, a proper schoolhouse, a doctor's office, and a weekly newspaper that covered county events with the cheerful grandiosity of a publication that understood its own importance to the community it served. Etta occasionally wrote letters to the editor about topics she found pertinent: the quality of the county road to the southern ranches, a proposed tax levy that she had analyzed and found poorly structured, and signed them E. Wallace, because she had found that E. Wallace received responses and Etta Wallace sometimes did not, and she was a practical woman. Ira read these letters in the newspaper with a private expression of satisfaction that he did not attempt to explain to anyone. In October, the Hendricks family hosted another barn dance, as they did every year. The Iron Cross attended as a group, now Ira and Etta, Tommy and Rosa with their daughter Clara, and the hands who wished to come. Clara Hendricks, seeing the group arrive, had the expression of a woman whose matchmaking, done retroactively and only in her own telling of the story, had produced excellent results. Ira and Etta danced. They danced better now than they had at that first dance in 1882, not more expertly, but with the ease of people who know each other's rhythms, who have danced in the kitchen while waiting for water to boil and on the porch on summer evenings when there was no fiddle but the occasion called for it anyway. Jonas Hendricks, watching them, said to his wife, "I remember when he used to come to these things alone and leave alone and look like a man attending a formal obligation." "I know," Clara said. "He looks different now. He looks like himself," Clara said. "I think this is what himself actually looks like, and we just did not know it before she came." Jonas considered this. "She came looking for a job. She came looking for a life," Clara said. "She just did not know exactly what it would look like, and neither did he." She watched them on the dance floor, Ira saying something to Etta that made her throw her head back and laugh, the laugh bright and genuine and full of the particular joy of someone laughing with a person they love. But they found it, which is the important part. Outside the barn, the October stars were the same as they always were, vast and indifferent and magnificent. The same stars that had been over this land when Ira's father first broke ground, when Etta first walked the lane to the main house with worn-through boots and a canvas satchel and a plan. The stars did not change. The land changed slowly. The people changed each other in ways that were small and daily, and accumulated over time into something that was, in the end, irreversible. And this was the irreversible thing. Ira Wallace, who had been a man alone in a house he had built for a family that had not continued, was no longer alone. And Etta Carver, who had walked into a story that was already in progress and had been told she did not belong in it, had not only found her place in it, but had rewritten several of the chapters. In the spring of 1889 they had a third child, a boy they named Daniel, after Ira's father, who had started the Iron Cross on an act of faith in difficult ground. Daniel arrived in the world with Etta's chestnut hair and his father's quiet, watchful manner, and was received by his older siblings with cautious fascination. Joseph, at 5, dignified and proprietorial, and Margaret, at 2, deeply uncertain about whether this new development was to her benefit. It proved to be. Margaret took to Daniel with the protectiveness of someone much older, which Daniel received with an equanimity that suggested he knew from very early on that he was in capable hands. The Iron Cross continued. It continued through hard years and good ones, through drought and plenty, through the slow transformation of the frontier into something more settled and complicated. The hands came and went, some staying for years, some for seasons, and the ranch built a reputation in Holt County for being a place where the work was fair, and the wages were right, and the people who ran it were straight-dealing in all their transactions. Etta's bookkeeping expanded, eventually, beyond the Iron Cross. She had begun consulting for 2 neighboring ranches by 1888, with Ira's full and enthusiastic support, which meant riding out twice a month with a saddlebag full of ledgers, and returning with the particular energized satisfaction of a woman doing work she was genuinely excellent at. By 1890, she was known in the county as the best accounts manager between Red Rock and the county seat, and she was paid accordingly. She kept the Iron Cross books herself, always. Those were the books she cared about the most, not because they were the most complex, though they were substantial, but because they were the record of a life. Every column was a season. Every balance was the result of decisions made together by 2 people who had learned to trust each other completely. On the evening of their 7th wedding anniversary, February 1890, Ira came to the kitchen where she was finishing the quarterly accounts and set a small velvet box on the table beside her hand. She looked up. "Open it," he said. She opened it. Inside was a compass, small, brass, precise. It worked. She could see immediately that it worked, the needle settling firm and sure to north. She looked up at him. "I noticed," he said quietly, "that the one you carried when you came here did not work. I thought you might want one that does." She looked at the compass in its box, and then at him, and felt the full weight of being known. Not generally known, not known in outline, but known in the specific details that most people consider too small to notice, known in the brass compass she carried for her father's memory, and the way she pushed her hair back when she was absorbed in numbers, and the way she had been precise about everything except her own heart, which had been more honest than precise. "You noticed that," she said. "I notice everything about you," he said simply. "I always have." She rose from the chair. She was not, as a rule, a woman who did things impulsively. Precision governed her and always had. But she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him and held on with the full completeness of someone who has arrived, finally and without reservation, where they were always trying to go. He held her. In the way he held things he valued carefully, steadily, with a patience that communicated permanence. Outside the Iron Cross, the February night was cold and clear, and the stars were doing their ancient, indifferent thing, enormous and bright over the Texas dark. Inside, the fire in the kitchen stove sent its warmth through the house, and somewhere down the hall Joseph and Margaret and Daniel were sleeping with the deep, unconscious trust of children who have never had reason to question where they are. Etta stood in Ira's arms and held the working compass in one hand and thought about north, about the direction you move toward when you know where you are going, about what it means to be lost and then to find, not just a road or a town or a job, but the specific life that was waiting. She had come to the Iron Cross with nothing but competence and determination, and a broken compass that always pointed north. She had found an honest man and a home and 3 children who were, each of them, the exact center of the world. She had built something here. Not alone, never alone, not anymore, but with both her hands and her full attention and all the precision she had, and some love that was larger than precision could contain. The compass in her hand pointed north. True north. The needle settled and held. She thought her father would have liked it here. She thought he would have approved of Ira's steadiness, and the children's names, and the clean double columns of the Iron Cross's books. She thought he would have sat at this kitchen table and talked for hours and been happy to see her happy. She pressed her face against Ira's shoulder. 7 years, he said quietly into her hair. 7 years, she agreed, and every one of them precisely as they should have been. He laughed, that rare, unguarded laugh that she had been the cause of and never got tired of. She felt it against her, warm and real. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly through their ancient paths, and the Iron Cross stood solid and warm against the cold Texas dark. And inside it, 2 people who had each, in their separate ways, arrived at the absolute last mile of hoping, had found each other across a kitchen table and a set of ledgers, and had built from that unlikely beginning something that was, in every measurement that mattered, complete. Joseph stirred in his sleep and said something in the half-language of a dreaming child. Margaret turned over. Daniel made the small, satisfied sound he made that meant he was deeply, thoroughly asleep and nothing in the world was troubling him. Ira and Etta stood in the kitchen in the firelight, holding on, compass in hand, headed north. Not lost, not alone, arrived.